Welcome to the FilmSEEN podcast.
So I'm so pleased to welcome writer and director Kent Jones to the podcast today. Welcome, Kent.
How you doing?
Pretty good. So I had the pleasure of watching your film DIANE at the IFC when you presented it there along with Martin Scorsese, who's your friend and executive producer. It was a really cool screening, and I loved the film. Could you tell us a little bit about the premise?
In order to talk about the premise, I think I'd have to talk about how many years I had it in mind, because really I had the first inkling of it when I was really young, like when I was a teenager, because I grew up around this matriarchy. My grandmother was the oldest of many brothers and sisters, and so I really knew, even when they were all still alive, that it was very special, and that they had I was very tuned into their temperament, which was very stoic, but very funny. And they were all tough because they had all gone through a lot, and they had all survived the Depression. And, you know, it was
a different generation, different era.
Oh, it's a particular kind of attitude and approach to life that is not really around anymore.
Yeah.
You know, things are always changing. Nothing is ever around forever. I think I had an inkling that I wanted to do that when I was very young, and then it just kind of stayed with me and changed and took on more form and shape over the years, and different things happened. And then in the late 90s, I saw Coppola's movie The Rainmaker, and Mary Kay Place has a very small part in it, but her performance, even though she's speaking with an Oklahoma twang, and it's a story that takes place down south, emotionally it was in the key that I had in mind. And so when I thought about it over the years, I always had her in mind. There was something else that I almost made, a couple of other narrative films actually, that I almost made first, because I made other documentaries before I made the narrative film. But then at a certain point in my life, after my own mother had passed away, I had told Mary Kay, I'd met her, I'd explained to her what I had in mind. She said, well, I hope I like it. You know? So she wrote to me and asked me where it was at, and I promised myself that I would not respond to her until I had a draft.
So was that sort of nerve-wracking sending her that first draft since you had her in mind, or at that point did you guys have a friendship?
We did have a friendship, but if she hadn't liked it, she wouldn't have liked it.
She was so perfect.
What could I do? Yeah, I thought she was.
Yeah, At this point, I've seen the film a couple of times, so I can't imagine anybody else have portraying that role.
Yeah. Well, the thing about actors, though, is that if someone else had portrayed the role, it would have been a different character.
Right. True.
So, but having said that, no, it was written for her and no one else. And sure, she could have turned it down, but I took a gamble.
Well, it paid off. I think what I love about the film, and it's a concept that I think about in general, is that I think one of the toughest things about just being an adult is knowing sort of when to be tough and when to be tender, yes. And just navigating that line of, how does she deal with her son that's going through this addiction, but then a lot of times she's remaining stoic and she's helping all her friends out throughout the film. She's always doing something, she's, whether it's volunteering in the kitchen, serving the needy, or if it's just, baking a tray of something, or visiting her cousin in the hospital, or then talking to her son. But then it's, how do you decide when to be firm with your kid or when to be nurturing, and I think that's one of the toughest things that I think you really depicted very well, because she was a strong character, but that's a tough thing for anybody.
Yeah. One of the things that has been, the response to the film has obviously been really heartening, and, but one of the things that's meant a great deal to me is that on more than one occasion, someone has come up to me and said, there's a filmmaker that I know, for instance. I can't tell you who it is, but, he said, look, I just have to say, I was that son, and that was my mother.
Wow.
And I felt like you really did justice to it. Another person wrote me a note and said, that was me. I was that character, the mother. Unfortunately, I lost my son, but I really felt like you did, justice to it. I did not have, write the script to capitalize on the opioid crisis. As a matter of fact, it predates that by quite a bit.
Sure.
It's based on, the character is based on the experience of a very close friend of mine. I think that when you're dealing with a situation like that, you're basically winging it.
Yeah.
As, that's pretty much a template for life in general. And I mean that truly, that's partly what the film is about. But
Actually, that's an interesting point that I also was thinking about too, because she's always sort of on point. She has her to-do list, and she's always kind of going from point A to point B. And the one time that she's not is then when you see her have the meltdown.
Yes.
At the bar. She doesn't know what to do with herself. Then she's being almost self-destructive when she's not being productive.
Yeah, self-destructive, also trying to cut loose in a place that obviously she used to go to when she was much younger and a different age, and, a place that's from a different time.
True.
But
Yeah.
still has the same jukebox. It's like,
yeah. I remember how I love how the bartender delivers that line. I remember you, Diane. And it's just, it's so loaded of such a loaded line that, there's a story there.
Yeah. I don't know. That's what it is to make a movie. I think if there's anything that I value in movies, it's what any given filmmaker does with, the creation of the world, the creation of characters, so that what happens is that the world takes on a life of its own. I think that it's making movies is about control, and making movies is also about surrender at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you have to know, if you're sticking to something and it's ironclad and that's the way that you want it, and that's the way it's going to be, and you're not going to, go home until you get it exactly the way you saw it in your head, then the result's not going to be very good. And I think that there's a little bit of a, in terms of film history, people point to the example of Stanley Kubrick or Alfred Hitchcock, and it's like, yes, but with them, the same thing happens. It just happens in tinier, more precise increments.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
But the actors in their movies come alive in the same way that the actors in John Cassavetes' films come alive, but they come alive in different increments.
Right. Yeah. That's a interesting point that I think ties into your earlier film that was a documentary, Hitchcock, Truffaut, that was fantastic. By the way, I think any filmmakers in particular out there, anybody that's actually calling themselves a filmmaker, they need to watch Hitchcock, Truffaut. Truffaut had a quote that it's actually in his movie Day for Night, that the shooting a film is like a stagecoach ride in the Old West. When you start, you're hoping for a pleasant trip, but pretty soon you just hope that you reach your destination.
Yeah. He was quite amazing because he was really sick at the end, obviously, but he didn't really show signs of it except in the last TV interview that he ever did, which was an interview about the last thing he ever did, which was the updated edition of Hitchcock, Truffaut, the book. He's shot from a particular angle so that you're not seeing, I guess, where he's had, his scars healing, brain surgery. But then he still sounds pretty sharp. But then he did a radio interview that, unless I'm wrong, was conducted maybe a couple weeks before he died. It might even be closer than that. And he sounds really sick. And I was thinking of using it in the movie, but I was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But he said something similar, but I think even more. It's looking at the same thing from another angle. He said making a film is like going into a fugue state. You just enter it, and then you just come out the other side. And he's quite right.
Yeah, I've experienced that feeling of when you finish a film and you feel like you just stepped outside of a vortex or something.
That's true. You have to be all in.
It's all encompassing.
Yep, that's right.
So prior to making Diane, you were a respected critic, and how did that, actually similar to Truffaut, who was a critic himself prior to being a filmmaker, how did that sort of influence or maybe change or inspire your filmmaking?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a long, complicated answer and try to make it as concise as I possibly can, but don't chide me for making it complicated. The thing is that I very early on in my life, I knew what I wanted to do. The fact that I took, and that was filmmaking, the fact that I took a long, a particularly lengthy path, I guess, to get there is to me kind of immaterial. I don't, that doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
And I started writing about films as a way of understanding films.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And, that's something that Olivier Assayas and I talked about a lot over the years, because for him, who was also a critic at Cahiers du Cinéma for quite a while.
Yeah, same publication as Truffaut.
Mm-hmm. And me for a while, I was their American correspondent
That's
in the
amazing.
90s. And I think that he, he said, well, sure, it's preparation. It's that's what it is. Over here, that's not a model that a lot of people have in mind. Paul Schrader was a film critic, and he said, the problem is, let's say you're a film critic, and this is something that only Paul would say, but he's, I understand the point. He said, you're a film critic and you say, this is Dustin Hoffman's best performance in years. Then, you make a movie and you want to cast Dustin Hoffman. And Dustin Hoffman's like, so you thought that was my best performance in years. What about the other work? And you're fucked. So It's just kind of like, I think Paul's exaggerating a little bit, but also
I know what he means.
I do. And and he's also the one who said, if you're a film critic, you're like a pathologist and you're trying to find out why the patient died. If you're a filmmaker, you're trying to keep the baby alive. But having said that, I just want to continue with my long-winded answer by saying I had to work through a lot of things with criticism to shed a lot of stuff that was, part of the world of criticism and cinephilia. And eventually, in the last few pieces that I wrote, I was really zeroed in on how movies were made, the divergence between what it was to make a movie and what people talked about when they reviewed movies, and the practicalities, the nuts and bolts of movies, which still is a little bit of a, is mystified, I think, by people.
Yeah.
And so my basic answer to your question is that I knew, that on some level, somehow, when I was younger, that I wanted to make the kind of movie from a perspective that I didn't have yet. So that's probably part of the reason that I waited. But I also knew going in, all of the movies that I'd seen and having that background was certainly, that's who I am. That's a great thing. It's a part of me. But then I had to leave it all behind, except when it came to practical problems, like, how do I want to do this? So I was able to have, with the DP, for instance, Wyatt Garfield, what do we want the movie to look like? And I said, I want to just duplicate what Jim Jarmusch did with Patterson, and I know him and I'm going to call him and ask him, and that's what we did.
Amazing.
Or with the music, I wanted the music to function in a certain way in the movie. And I thought about the way that the Dardenne brothers used music and The Kid with a Bike, stuff like that. But those are just practical issues. How's the camera going to work at the end when she's dying? It's kind of like the camera, where the way that it works in Son of Saul, by Laszlo Nemes, but it's not exactly like that. It's just that I'm able to, give examples, and that's very helpful.
For sure. That actually, first of all, I love your use of the music and the score. Was that an original score?
The stuff that's part of the soundtrack, the scoring soundtrack, it was an original score by Jeremiah Bournefield, who composed the score for Hitchcock Truffaut, but it's variations on a hymn by Vaughan Williams.
Great.
I also used a piano piece by John Cage when she's driving up into the forest. You know?
Yeah, and I noticed it was sort of unique because it was sort of sparse. The first time we hear the scores, I think at least 5 scenes in, when she's
going to his house for the
Brian's
first time.
house to check up on Brian for the first time. And, you know.
Well, yeah, music. I mean, you know, the thing is that it's like any element in a movie. Why is it there, right? So it's like, you know, it's like Marty Scorsese would say, if a movie's in black and white, great. Why is it in black and white? What is the black and white? You know, there's some movies that are shot in black and white now, and you're kind of like, why?
Right.
And then there's some movies that are shot in color where it's just sort of like, okay, whatever. You know, you could, you know, they're just shot.
Right. It's not a rhyme or reason.
That's about it. And so I wanted, you know, if there's music in a movie, what role is the music going to play? And so I wanted a hymn because I wanted something that underscored the devotional aspect of her character.
Yeah.
And her relationship with her son.
Yeah, no. I think that's amazing. Well done. I'm always curious how films evolve. You know, like you kind of mentioned that earlier, that, you know, you'd been thinking about this for a long time, and I'd heard you in the past, including at the IFC. It was kind of based off your mom.
Yeah, I only figured that out later.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting. And actually, that sort of ties into something that I think it was David Fincher that said in your documentary on Hitchcock Truffaut that a filmmaker can't really escape sort of who they are. It bleeds out into your film. So I thought that was really fascinating. And
Fincher is a real guide. He's someone who really... He just keeps his eye on the work.
Yeah, he's very focused.
You know, he's really focused, and everything that he said, he thinks he's so funny. He thinks he's so articulate. He's very funny. But you know, every single thing that he said, I could have used in that movie.
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah.
But what you're referring to, he's absolutely right. He's like, you know, your prurient interests, your whatever, it's just like you can't...
It oozes out.
Yeah, somehow. And so when a film is not really working, or when something isn't quite happening quite right, such as, you know, certain films that are nominated for Oscars and supposedly going to win them, you know, I mean, it's just sort of like there's something about the way that they're put together where the level of anxiety and fussiness behind the camera manifests in a weird way.
Yeah.
Somehow, you know, always. And I think that that's something that's a little bit lost. One of the things that's been lost in criticism with the collapse of the newspaper industry and all that stuff, you know, is that a little bit of discernment about that. I think that at the moment in film criticism, there's a little bit too much focus on form on the one hand, and you know,
and the behind
same
the scenes
stuff. Well, no, but the themes, you know,
right.
Sort of like, yeah. So I feel like, you know, what's the life of the movie? That's a really important one.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'd mentioned this over an email that your film definitely rewards repeat watchability, because there's things that I definitely caught watching it again that I didn't notice the first time. Because on the first time, you're just sort of on the journey. You're trying to figure things out. You're trying to understand things about the character and each of the characters and what their relationships are to each other. And then once you're watching it without, you know, trying to figure out those things, then you're kind of just completely immersed, you know. And so I will say, I want to get a button here that says spoiler alert. I mean, I hope it's okay to talk about the ending, because it's a very character-driven film. It's not hinging on the plot. But when I first saw the film, I don't think I understood the scene where Diane is at home toward the end, and, you know, then there's the guy that looks sort of like Christ-like, but then all of a sudden he offers her heroin, and there's that strange music playing. I'm like, hey, that was kind of...
Yeah.
You know, I was like, that's kind of interesting, you know, like, you know, what was up with that scene, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't dislike it. I just didn't understand it. But then upon watching it again and even a third time, I love it because you're so immersed in her world that you pulled off something that's really fascinating to me, that you've pulled us into her subconscious, that like that's her dream. And then it feels really natural.
Yeah. I mean, it's very important to me that the inner world and the outer world are very, there is no border.
Yeah.
Someone who really had a very clear understanding of who opened that up in cinema really is Ingmar Bergman. I mean, it wasn't on my mind when I was making the movie, but then rewatching a lot of his films, it just, in Cries and Whispers, there is no borderline between the inner world and the outer
Persona,
world.
all his films.
Persona, Hour of the Wolf particularly, And so that's something that was just part of the movie. And then that also works in terms of the sense of time in the movie. And I do admire, I like the idea of giving the audience something that they're not necessarily going to understand immediately or take in immediately, and only take it in a reflection. For some reason, people seem to be, that's a thing that's easy to sort of like, if you're itching to ask a question at a film festival or something like that, that's something that can come to mind, like off the tip of your tongue. It's like, what was up with that scene with the, and you just be like, well, it's a dream.
It's great. And it makes so much sense, especially like I said, after repeated watchings, that I really love the scene. And I love how even the music comes in, because it's so natural, where she's sort of dozing off. And before that, she's writing poetry at that point in the film. And
the music in that scene is very, when I was young, I was a really big Brian Eno fan. And Brian Eno opened a lot of doors for me. One of them was to Steve Reich's music. And so in the film, in fact, there's this piece, the tape delay piece, Come Out to Show Them, that's playing when she goes in and Jake's character is all junked out, that kind of... And then, but that piece that's playing at that point, when she wakes up from the dream, is a piece by the Moving Star Hall Singers from the Georgia Sea Islands that Brian Eno and David Byrne sampled for My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, their album. It was sort of like the beginning of sampling, in the late 70s. And then it overlaps with another Steve Reich tape delay piece. But that's all part of my, toolkit, I guess, but it felt right.
Yeah, no, it definitely. So I know that, and forgive me if you get asked this a lot, but since Scorsese was the executive producer of the film, and he's a close friend of yours, and sort of mentored you, and what kind of, I guess, guidance did he give you on the film? Was he watching rough cuts of it, or?
He's always encouraged me, to get personal. There was a point when I was going to make a movie. This is probably in the 90s, and there was someone else who was in his orbit at that time who was also had a script that he was trying to get made, and he said, "You, I know, are going to make your movie. Him, I'm not so sure about, but you have the drive." At a certain point, there was a project that got very close to being made, and then a bunch of things were going on in my life, and it was just like, I have to put this on hold for a minute. And the thing that really was on my mind at that point the most was like, I don't want Marty to think that I'm just like dropping out of, making movies. And I made Hitchcock Truffaut after that and stuff like that. And, but I think when I set it up, I wanted to do it. It's, the movie was made really thanks to Oren Moverman, who had just started a company with called Film, a Sight Unseen. Caroline Kaplan, Luca Borghese, and Ben Howe, but Oren was the one who said, okay, we have the money, And Marty read the script, understood what I was going for. We did look at cuts, but the cuts I got a little further along than a rough cut before I showed it to him. It wasn't quite rough, but it certainly wasn't finished either. So we went through it, scene by scene, and then we went through it again. There was a certain point when when it was suggested that I change the ending, and I just told him.
Really?
Yeah, he just started laughing. And so, but it was a very gentle suggestion.
Sure,
it was
sure.
just, it was very funny. So anyway, no, I mean, he's just been behind it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Just in general, one of my observations that I really like your use of exposition. There wasn't too much of it. It was, you're kind of just pulled into her world from the beginning frame of the film, where before you actually even see the first frame, you're just hearing the noises at the hospital.
Yeah.
She had dozed off because she's visiting her cousin. Then she feels bad about it, which I think was a nice moment. And I like the way that Donna's looking at her in that moment. So it was, it started off.
The actress who plays Donna is actually from my hometown, which is just amazing.
That is amazing.
I mean, I think that in general, any movie that I'm going to say that I love is pretty much like that. Nothing is spelled out. Everything is, but with the caveat that at a certain point in film history, at an earlier point in film history, films were made, narratives were structured in a different way. But still, even having said that, Hitchcock, in the film, I don't show the outside of Diane's house until deep in.
I noticed that. Yeah.
And
I didn't notice that until, subsequent viewings.
Well, that is one thing that I must say is, could be related to, Hitchcock Truffaut, because Hitchcock said never waste an establishing shot on establishing something. Always use it when it's actually going to have some emotional value. Don't waste any shot on just,
I noticed
something.
I noticed that. That actually, ties into the pacing. I thought the pacing was outstanding.
Well, I wanted to have a sense of time that as the movie went on became something different. In other words, like I wanted the driving sequences to punctuate the movie, but I wanted that at a certain point they were going to function as something else more than just driving in a car, and that like the movement of time in the movie was going to become different.
Yeah. To quote your friend David Fincher again, directing is behavior over time.
That's right. Well, it's two things. He says it's editing behavior over time, and it's taking things that are really long and making them short, and taking things that are really short and stretching them out.
Yeah. No, I thought that was
quite right.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'd love to actually, could we watch one of the scenes from the film?
Sure. Which one?
Okay. It's actually the scene where she's at the buffet and she doesn't want to hear it anymore about Brian.
We're going to have a full house for Christmas again. They're bringing the kids. Oh, God, it's starting to be a chore, if you know what I mean. Oh, I love them to pieces, but, I've got the Christmas tree, and then I got to do the cooking, and the grandkids are running around, and then I get to be really tired, and I start snapping at them.
But you'd miss them if they didn't come.
Yeah, but, I like to be in an easy chair looking down on them.
I am just so goddamn sick of it, and I can't stand to hear me or you or anyone else say one more goddamn word about it.
Brian, you mean?
Who else?
was this place before it was Country Buffet?
What the hell was it? Finest kind.
Finest kind, that's it. God, it was the worst food I ever ate.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know why I don't remember that the food was no good.
well, when we get to laughing and yucking it up, who gives a damn anyway? We might as well be lapping up a bucket of fried sawdust. It wouldn't matter.
Well, it's better than this deliciousness.
That's right.
How was everything tonight?
Tremendous. Thank you.
Liar.
I love that you held it on her look after
Well,
for a decent moment. Maybe we should just wait for the sirens to go by
yeah, okay.
for a moment.
Yeah, sure. You must get a lot of them around this neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
we do. Yeah.
On the other
It
hand,
is what it is.
It's New York.
It's Manhattan, exactly.
Yeah, why bother? You know, there are a few things about that scene. I mean, one of them is that every element of a movie counts. Every element of a movie counts. There's nothing where it's just sort of like, oh yeah, give me whatever. If
Right.
And when you again, if you're making a movie, you've seen movies where you can tell that that's kind of what's happened, where somebody said, oh yeah, sure, just give me whatever sheet, whatever color sheet you want hanging on the line, whatever shirt you want on the character, and it's just like, no, that's what you do. Again, to refer back to my friend Asayas, he said directing is basically answering questions all day long.
Yes.
And you just respond. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. There is no such thing. You just respond, And so with that scene, one element that's very important to me for the whole movie is the language. The way that the people talk where I grew up, the world that I grew up in, is a way that I don't even know if people still talk. They might not. All I know is that was what I grew up with, and that was what I, wanted to hear coming out of the actors, and I wanted to hear them speaking those lines, and to have a certain relation to the language. My next movie is a contemporary New York movie. That's not going to be part of it, but it's like that's what I wanted for this, and then again, to get back to this question of like establishing shots and exposition and stuff like that. At a certain point, one of the producers was like, well, how come we're not seeing any exteriors of the diner? I'm like, who cares? I don't need to see the exterior of the diner. Yeah. This is a movie we're shooting it in 20 days and we have a very limited budget. So it's just sort of like, why bother, shooting something that I'm not going to use?
And actually, I thought even the way you set it up was really efficient. You kind of had that tracking looking shot from inside the buffet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool how that sort of tracked along into the
buffet.
conversation. That's
anybody
perfect.
Who's been to one of those towns knows what they look like, and if you haven't, then look it up or something. I just sort of feel, but what's more important is their relationship to it. They've gone there every night of the week probably for like 6 years, once a week. They go to this one, then they go to that one, and so on and so forth. So, and then just to be a little talk about some of the technical stuff. We had an issue with one of the Christmas decorations falling down that we corrected in post. The kind of thing that happens all the time in movies now, and you never know.
True.
So does resizing of the image. It happens constantly. Yeah. People don't worry about microphones in the shot anymore. They just paint them out. It's just like there's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And then in terms of what you're talking about, in editing, first of all, I have these two actresses who are grounded in comedy. That's Mary Kay's world. Drama is not something that she's done that often, but Andrea, same thing.
Yeah, Andrea was in My Big Fat
Greek Wedding, but for me, it's a CTV. I mean, it's like, and so Andrea used to live in the same building as Andrea, and so I just worshipped at her altar, and I very respectfully dropped a script off at her doorstep and left a note, and she was great, and I actually wound up writing an extra scene for her.
That's amazing.
Which I think really is great. So it made the movie better. I didn't write it on set. I mean, I wrote it before. She was like, maybe the part, I'm not sure if there's enough, and I wrote her another scene. So that scene, though, had more dialogue in it. I don't remember what lines we cut out. We sort of went into it as in progress without, we lost a lot at the head. Because it felt like the right thing to do. And then the rhythm of the scene is about the eye line, what's going on emotionally between the two of them, and about someone who's making a show of not wanting to talk.
Yeah.
Who's exhausted. Who is not used to being angry, but who is used to getting defensive. Who winds up getting defensive at the person with the person that she's not really angry at.
Right.
Or frustrated with. And then on set, I do vividly remember saying to Andrea, okay, so what is Bobby going to do to respond? How do you respond to that? It's a mystery because you're not really angry at her.
Right.
You know what she's going through better than anybody else. And Andrea said, hang on, let me just. And so
that was improvised, the
well, her whole, yes, that whole taking her time. And I was watching it and I remember watching it on the monitor or on the thing. And I was really, mesmerized. And we got in the cutting room and I looked at it and I said, just let it play.
That's amazing, man. Because there's a lot of filmmakers that would be tempted for whatever reason just to trim it down or cut it. But I love the fact that it lingered there on that moment.
Well, once again, it's just like, had I been younger when I made my first film, it would have been very movie-ish, and there would have been a lot of, homages to whoever, I don't know what, Philippe Garrel and Wim Wenders or something, and it would have been a very different kind of movie. But also, I wouldn't have taken the time, and I probably would have been more self-conscious about the question of style. So, I think thinking about the question of style is something that leaves you pretty quickly, because it's like Truffaut, your quote that you brought up from Truffaut about the runaway train and, stuff. You just want to get to the station, and the fugue state. But also, it's just not really style, something that other people can talk about, not you, not the filmmaker.
It's a good way to look at it.
I think so, and so with that, I just was, but also it's just kind of like, that's the emotion is always with the actor.
Right. And your film is very much grounded in the real world. Like DIANE is a real person. It feels like, just like how when you watch The Irishman, that feels like the real world. It's not sort of like this Wes Anderson world, which that's great style filmmaking too, but it's a different thing. There's like
yes, it's different, but I need to say the thing about Wes's movies that's very special is that they appear to be, there's a big difference between a movie by Wes Anderson and a movie by somebody who's imitating Wes Anderson. Like, for instance, Lemony Snicket's incredibly whatever series of events, or I don't know, there are several other movies that are, extremely imitative of Wes's movie making. But the thing about Wes is that every single one of his movies is grounded in a very particular place. He reinvents the names of things. He reinvents the symbols.
the cadence of things.
Yeah, but everything is grounded in a particular place. Everything.
Yeah.
And, as a matter of fact, I'm just, I've been doing something with him recently, and it's just sort of like his process is extremely rooted in the idea of everybody making the movie being together, in one location, so that they're all sharing the experience and all talking instead of being spread out all over the place. And, And so I know what you're saying, but it's just, and obviously, yes, the centered compositions and the fanciful nature of things.
And by the way, I didn't mean it in any way.
No, I
as a
know.
knock. Yeah, I love Wes Anderson, and I would even put my own feature film that I directed, The Trouble, in that category of it's its own world. Like, it takes place in the South Bronx, but it's sort of like an urban Western. You know, it's like it's its own world, not quite attempting to be, you know, a very realistic world necessarily. You know, it's its own world, but your film is a realistic film. And even just the emotions on Diane's face when she's in that diner scene, you feel it. And when I've watched your film again, one of my observations is that I feel, maybe like from a sense of empathy, but I feel a sense of tension when they're asking about her son. How's Brian doing? You're like, oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. And it's also very important that he's a bore. Because I've been around junkies, and they're aggressive and grandiose and self-pitying and compulsive liars. And I feel like because the movie's called Diane, and because Mary Kay is in every scene, and because it's so much of a matriarchy, Jake Lacy didn't get as much attention as he should have, because fantastic. I'm really, really happy with his performance, and I loved working with him. But I feel like his character is not. That's what it's like, you know, with junkies, and then when they kick drugs, the addiction doesn't go away.
Yeah, that's another thing that I liked, because when you see him, it was a great nuanced performance by Jake Lacy. When you see him at that roadside diner, when she, you know, hasn't seen Brian in a long time, and, you know, she rushes from the hospital to go see him, and, you know, his portrayal of being somebody that's clean, but, you know, you could still tell his nerves are shot and he's a little off. It's not quite, he's just clean and he's just like a regular person all of a sudden, which I thought that was very authentic.
There's a film, I just looked at it again, actually. And it's always stayed with me. It's, you know, it's a film that was made right before the best years of our lives to get the jump on it. It's about returning vets. It's called Till the End of Time. It's with Robert Mitchum and Guy Madison and Dorothy McGuire. And so Guy Madison is a returning vet, and he lives in San Diego. I think it's San Diego. And there's a scene where he and Dorothy McGuire go to a little diner, and they're sitting there having their milkshakes or their drinks, and then she looks over and she notices that there's a vet sitting at the counter with the shakes. And she looks at Guy Madison and she says, and so he's like, come on, let's fall in. And she sits on one side of the guy, and Guy Madison sits on the other side of the guy, and they put their arms around him, and they keep him steady until he gets it together. And there's something about that scene that is part of like what the scene you're referring to in Diane is, which is that it's someone who's come out of something, and the sight, and you feel that they've been blasted backward, you know, that they've had all the stuff that they've carried just like blasted away from them, and that they look like, you know, they've just been thrown back into life. And I wanted that for him, and I remember what it was like when my friend got out of detox. A lot of the lines that Jake speaks came directly from that encounter.
And I think it's really interesting because it reminded me of somebody that I knew in college that had a substance abuse problem, but he was just a person that just got really into things. Like, you know, like to me, was authentic about Brian. Like, he substituted one addiction for another addiction and became a religious fanatic. And, you know, so I thought that was really interesting.
Well, you know, I mean, that's not uncommon.
Very common.
And that's not the way it happened with my friend, but, you know, I mean, it might have under other circumstances, I guess. And I just, but that's very present. You know, the personality of the addict very gradually, you know, over the years, it takes a while before it drains away, I think.
Yeah. So fantastic job on making Diane. Everybody that hasn't seen it, watch it on Amazon Prime. And I'd like to segue into our second portion of the podcast where we're asking each guest to discuss a couple of scenes that they love, maybe a couple of their favorite scenes of any movie or just, So I'd reached out to Kent prior to the podcast to, maybe think about a couple of scenes. So what's the first scene that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I thought of two scenes. One is from a film that was made last year, and the other is from a film that was made in 1928. It's almost 100 years old. Sunrise, which is a movie that's canonical for anybody who loves cinema. And it's a movie that actually changed filmmaking. It's directed by F.W. Murnau, who came over from Germany, and he directed Nosferatu and The Last Laugh. And I believe, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think that Murnau started as a set designer. He was offered, probably based on the success of The Last Laugh, to be brought over in style by Fox to do anything he wanted. So he basically had all the resources of the studio at his disposal. And what he did was he made this film Sunrise, in which he recreates Central Europe. I mean, basically, it's a movie that takes place somewhere, and I don't know where, Germany / Poland / something, he doesn't name it, and it's about a man who's a farmer, played by George O'Brien, who later acted in a lot of John Ford's movies, who's married to Janet Gaynor, and he's lured by a woman from the city who's come to vacation where he lives. She becomes his lover and lures him out every night to go and make love, in the reeds under the moonlight. And then she says, well, why don't you come with me, and why don't you drown your wife? That would be a simple way to do it. Drown your wife, take her across the river to the city, but you can drown her on the way, and then take some bulrushes with you, and that'll save you.
It made me wonder, that scene made me wonder if it was, that must have been shocking for its time, I feel like. It was a pre-code sort of film. Right?
It's a pre-code film, but it's not as shocking as it might seem, since the best-selling novel of 1925 was An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser, which is based on a true story, actually, which I think took place near where I grew up, of someone who pushed his girlfriend into the water and, went and married somebody else. But yes, the movies are, different story. And it's also a film that has the cast, it has kind of the sense of a fable. And every single shot of it is so beautifully constructed. I mean, when you hear the term mise en scène, some critics still use, you can see that it's a term that I wonder about sometimes, but when you watch that film, you see, okay, I get the meaning. Every single element of the film comes alive. And Murnau was someone who interacts to create a really living organism. And, Murnau, there's a beautiful quote from him where he says, film is about creating situations that express the most fleeting harmony of atmosphere. So, just a little breeze on a leaf, on a tree, or a glimmer of, a shimmering light, on someone's raincoat, or, something like that. I mean, everything counts.
Yeah.
It took forever to film. It was filmed at the same time as Seventh Heaven by Frank Borzage, and Janet Gaynor, I think, was doing Seventh Heaven by day and Sunrise by night, or maybe it was the reverse. I can't remember. And probably the reverse, because a lot of Sunrise is daytime. And it had a big effect on John Ford when he made Four Sons. And so there's a scene in it, the scene where he takes her out in the boat and he stands up and hovers over her, and she realizes that he means to throw her overboard, and she just puts her head in her hands, and he can't do it. He just crumples, and his response is beautiful. He starts rowing furiously toward the opposite shore, and when they get to the shore, she runs away, and he runs after her and keeps saying, "Don't be afraid of me." And then she gets on a tram, and it's a tram that goes from the country to the city. So I certainly can't enumerate, the precise succession of shots, but it's like, she's positioned in one place on the tram where she will not look at him. He's standing. The tram conductor you mostly see from, behind, and the tram has windows. Basically what you're doing is you're seeing the world passing by from two angles, from out right in front of the tram operators, and then from the side view, the side windows. And I think at one point they're overlooking a gorge and some trees. And gradually, as the tram goes, it goes from the country to the city, and the landscape gradually changes. And as the landscape is changing, and as our vision of things is changing, and as the husband is getting closer to the wife, you really feel the passage of time and the turning of their relationship, the emotions between them as with the movement of the train. It's an absolutely remarkable thing. And that is, for me, fundamental to what cinema is. And this goes back to what we were talking about before with DIANE, the inner world and the outer world are the same thing.
Yeah.
They're just different pathways to get there, and so it's a film that I hadn't looked at for quite a while, but I remember, but I looked at it again last night, and it's even more powerful, I think, than it was in the past. I remember seeing it for the first time when I was in my teens, maybe, and just seeing it again and again over the years. It's a film
It was considered a lost film at some point, right?
No, not Sunrise.
Okay, not Sunrise.
No.
Okay.
But it's no, there are other films of Murnau's. There's a film of Murnau's that was lost called Four Devils.
Well, maybe that's what I was thinking of.
And that remains lost. But it's a film that was of enormous, importance to filmmakers at the time, and then subsequent filmmakers, Godard, and, all of the people in the French New Wave and beyond. And it's one of the great, moments in cinema. And it was a movie that didn't really set the box office on fire when it first came out, and that became more, that's the thing. When a film is great, it doesn't matter how many awards it doesn't win,
Right.
or how well
True.
it does or doesn't do at the box office, Vertigo being a case in point.
Yeah, great case in point.
Yeah. And Sunrise being another.
Which, that's something I forgot to mention earlier, is I think that was, I don't think a lot of younger people realize that Hitchcock didn't quite get the critical respect.
For Vertigo?
No, just in general, from Vertigo, or just a lot of his work, until, critics like Truffaut, that's what your film sort of highlighted in a really intriguing way. I didn't really know that. I sort of grew up respecting Hitchcock and loving his movies, and even watching reruns of his shows, and just thinking like, hey, that was the personification of a film director. Yeah, it's Hitchcock.
They're kind of all great.
Yeah,
I mean,
and so it was kind of mind blowing that he was not quite taken as seriously by critics
Here.
Here, right, in the U.S. But in France, they would write about him in a different way. What I find about the history of French filmmaking is that I think they had an interesting evolution, because I think when Godard and Truffaut were watching a lot of those films, they weren't watching them with subtitles, because I think it was post World War II France. I remember reading something up, like when they were very young, when they were really like young kids. So they were just watching the images, and the images was sort of dictating the style of, you know, their earliest formation of film.
These are all guys that were born around 30, 32. Right?
Yeah.
So when the war ended, they were 15, 16. And the thing is that during the war, obviously, American movies were forbidden.
Right.
And it took a few years before they came into the country. When they did came into the country, they flooded in. I mean, I think the first time Citizen Kane was seen in France was probably 46 or 47 or something like that, you know. And so and I'm sure that they were subtitled. They must have been. I think that what you're referring to is the Cinémathèque Française, where Henri Langlois did not want to show subtitles. So they would see older films, anything that they saw at the Cinémathèque. It's, you know, even money that they saw without subtitles. That's true.
Yeah.
But anything that was playing commercially, it would have to have had subtitles or be dubbed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess let's talk about the second film, which The Irishman. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I don't know if anyone's ever pointed this out to you, but I think DIANE is structurally similar to The Irishman, and I think in a great way.
It's come up.
Oh, really? But I think it's a good, only because I only realized it when I was describing it to a friend of mine. I think it's kind of like
The Irishman's about a bunch of old men who die, and DIANE's about a bunch of old ladies who die. I think that. Yeah, you know, I mean, obviously it's not something that he and I.
No, and obviously they're each their own unique stories.
Yeah.
I think it's just, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember at a certain point he said, you know, it's interesting because I'm kind of dealing with some of these things, you know, too.
Scorsese said it himself.
Yeah, too. Just a bit in our movie, you know.
Well, I think it's great because you see different perspectives. Like you see how DIANE deals with things, or, you know, then if you're sort of contrasting to the sequence and kind of the ending of The Irishman that you want to discuss, starting from the banquet scene and then even going to when Frank he has his kind of weird superstition that he doesn't want to be buried underneath the ground. Instead, he wants to be in a tomb because he feels that that's less final. And I think that's really authentic. So I grew up in the Bronx. Yeah. And I grew up, my dad had a business on Arthur Avenue, very legit business, by the way. But I grew up in an area that was like the Little Italy area.
Yeah, sure.
New York,
Arthur
you know,
Avenue.
where, you know, it's so I grew up around a lot of that, around, you know, that sort of gangster element.
Yeah, I mean, I'm part Italian, Abruzzese, and I didn't grow up around that, you know, New York, the Bronx, Arthur Avenue, Little Italy, Sicilian, Neapolitan. It's a different kind of thing.
I mean, I'm Albanian.
Yeah,
you know,
there's a lot of Albanian. And there's a lot of Albanian and like Bosnian in Arthur Avenue now, right?
Yeah. No,
like there are Burek restaurants.
Yes, there are. Yeah, absolutely.
But Albania is so close to
It's
Italy.
so close. I always say, you know, Italy's shaped like a boot. Yeah. If the boot kicks backwards, it's kicking Albania because it's just across the Adriatic Sea. So, you know, I grew up in a very Albanian Catholic family.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I grew up in a part of the Bronx, Pelham Parkway, with other, you know, with Sicilian kids, and, you know, very culturally similar.
John Belushi was Albanian too.
Yeah, he was one of the most famous ones. So I just wanted to mention that because I think The Irishman also just, I love, it's so authentic. You know, it's like one of the most authentic gangster films.
Yeah, where to start? You know, I mean, I watched the Oscars this year because I was out in LA, and for the first time in years, I actually endured the broadcast itself. And, you know, I mean, it was like, whatever, just as much of a slog as it always was. But, you know, I mean, Marty was nominated for a bunch of things. And, you know, I'm a friend of Noah Baumbach's. And I, you know, everybody knew that they weren't going to win these awards.
Good year for movies.
Yeah, it was a good year for movies, not a good year for the Oscars, but it was a pleasant surprise what won.
Yeah, no,
award.
I love Parasite.
I must say that when Chris Rock got up and he made the joke, "Oh, Marty, I love the first season of The Irishman." That obviously begs the question about the length. So, again, people, when they're at film festivals or when they're, they have sort of sometimes people in any situation, it doesn't matter whether it's about film or not, can have sort of like a preset. So it's like, oh, that's really long, before they're even thinking about, And so, The Irishman's really long. A friend of mine told me that, some Academy voters feel that the middle hour lags. All I can say is to each his own, whatever. If you really are intent on the film lagging and, you feel like 3 hours is a lot of time because you need to get back to, your iPhone, then, sure. If you're going to say that something lags, why not that? All I can say is I just don't think it's true.
Well put.
And the proof being that, my wife and I went to see the movie when it was pretty much finished, but it was before they had done any of the visual effects. And everybody, Bob and Joe and Al Pacino, had little dots. And, both of us were mesmerized. And when it was over, we're like, oh, can we start that again? And it's like, yes, Marty's my friend, but he's not, but it's like, whatever. A film experience is a film experience.
Right. You're still going to either respond to the film or not.
I loved his films before he and I knew each other. And so that's one thing. And in terms of the length, what you're doing when you're watching the movie, it appears, I think someone said something like it's a film that doesn't really have a narrative. Again, not true. It's just, it's like, what is the narrative? Right. Is the narrative about, Jimmy Hoffa being killed and, is the narrative, what is the narrative? Is it about the unions? Is it about, the mob? Yeah, it is, but then it isn't.
Right.
And it appears to be very straightforward until you stop and remember that you're watching a movie that begins with someone in a nursing home, remembering a trip he took. The trip that he took prompts memories of his friendship with Russell Buffalino. So you're dealing with a flashback within a flashback, and a series of flashbacks, really. You're shifting back and forth between the trip and the past, and then every once in a while, and then you're back to the nursing home, and then, so it's like, it's a film with an extremely complex structure that does not appear to be complex because it's so fluid. And it's a film with an incredible amount of characters and locations. I think that there are like 250 locations and like 500 speaking parts in that movie or something like that. And everything is so fluid that you're not really, you're aware of it, but it doesn't really, it's just what it is.
It is what it is.
The film covers so much ground, it keeps growing in your mind after it's over. At a certain point in the narrative, you start to become tuned into Joe Pesci's body language with Bob De Niro.
So good.
Things are getting out of control. And you start to understand, and he's gentle all the way through. And it's like, look, certain people, I'm not going to say who, but they're having a problem. And at a certain point, around the point where the banquet happens, you understand that things are ramped up a little bit.
So much. Yeah.
But it's not like, nobody has a big outburst except for Tony Salerno,
right.
It's like, but that's different. But you understand that things are moving up another notch.
Yeah. It's like bubbling about beneath the surface.
Yeah. And so at the banquet, at the banquet scene, they're honoring him. But what it also is, it's a scene of looks. And all the way through the movie, Anna Paquin's character she has one line of dialogue in the whole movie, or two, right? But she's a crucial character, and the film really is all about her in the sense that she's seeing absolutely everything without saying anything about it. The wives are seeing absolutely everything too, but they have a vow to not say anything about it. She's seeing absolutely everything, but not saying about it because she's just the one who sees. She's the one who witnesses everything. And you're seeing it all play out in that scene. And you're also seeing Bob De Niro watching the interactions from a distance as he's being honored between, Joe Pesci and Al Pacino, and then a heartbreaking moment when Joe Pesci says, well, some people are thinking you might have a failure to appreciate. Al Pacino's like, and then and when he says in so many words something like, I'm sorry, it's just me. I'm not going to change. I can't give up my union.
Yeah.
And then you know that something has happened. And at the same time, Joe Pesci gives Bob De Niro that ring.
Yeah.
And the ring, the weight of that ring, you can really feel. And from there, you're shifting to the trip, and then you're getting into the machinations of, are we going to meet at the Red Fox? I think it's called the Red Fox Lodge, or whatever. And then, when Joe Pesci, says to Bob when they're eating their corn, their cereal, we're not going to go. We're going to take a plane. Listen, I did all I could for him, but I had to keep you in this. And then that unbelievable moment when they're in the car and he says, give me your sunglasses. What is that? It's a very mysterious moment, but it's also a moment that it carries an enormous amount of emotion. And Bob's character knows what he has to do. And the plane takes off and the plane lands. He gets into the car, the gun is there. And as those things are happening, you realize that's when his soul is being damaged.
Yeah.
When he actually kills Jimmy Hoffa, it's unremarkable because he's already dead. And so is Jimmy Hoffa,
Yeah.
The damage is already done. But then there's more damage later. He goes back, Joe Pesci gives him the glasses back, and then there's that, I better call Joe. You didn't call her yet? Why?
She knows.
And then, the phone call, it's like, well, Joe, whatever, I don't,
Right. But I like how for the daughter, that is the smoking gun.
It's astonishing. And then, and then age becomes a real factor. Then suddenly it's like people start dying. And then suddenly Bob is left alone. There's the amazing scenes with Joe Pesci where it's just like, we picked him over, over us, fuck him,
Yeah. Justification of it.
And he's just left alone. And then, it's just sort of like the scene that you referred to where he's picking out the coffin, the scene where the FBI men come,
Well, it kind of ties into the theme that I mentioned even when I was discussing DIANE, that I think one of the toughest things just about adulthood in general is sort of knowing when to be tough, and when to be tender, and especially in that world of gangsters, because it's like Al Pacino is, Jimmy Hoffa is just grilling these guys in the banquet scene, but especially in that time, in that place with those people, that is the equivalent of a death sentence, amongst everything else that happened.
But also it's the same thing as Sunrise in the sense that you're watching a series of events unfold, but underneath the series of events, there's something else that's unfolding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And it really, and then, when you're seeing him flip through the pictures, of his loved ones, and one of them is Jimmy Hoffa, and do you know who that is? Yeah, sure you know who that is, and then he's having the conversation with the priest, who's played by a real priest, and they improvised a lot of that. And I really, I really have to say, Bob De Niro, it's on the one hand astonishing, and on the other hand not at all surprising that he didn't get any recognition for his performance in the movie, because it's like, it's so good that it's the kind of acting that people don't actually reward. It's like Robert Forster and Jackie Brown. You don't know just how, and Bob has never been afraid of simplicity. And at this point in his life now, he's just, So when he has that amazing scene with the priest where he says, well, the priest says, don't you feel any remorse? And he says, well, yeah, water under the dam. But what kind of a man would make a phone call like that, And then at the very end of the movie, can you leave the door open? Just a crack.
Yeah.
And you realize when you've seen the movie more than once that the whole issue of leaving the door open is something the seed has been planted before.
By Jimmy Hoffa, yeah.
Jimmy Hoffa likes to leave the door open, and then Bob doesn't want to be buried. He wants to be, because
Right.
who knows,
Right.
So I really feel, and, it's also the reality of a nursing home, day turns into night, that's what it's like in those places. I've certainly spent enough time in them. And so, the one last factor that I would talk about is that we're so used to seeing in movies about aging older people played by younger people. To see the reverse is something new.
Yeah.
It is. And I think that people are bringing a kind of perspective. These guys are bringing a kind of perspective that they would not have had if the movie had been made 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it was amazing performances all around.
By that film.
Yeah, and I love Joe Pesci's performance in particular. In the banquet scene, that might be my favorite. Actually, my favorite scene in the movie is the banquet scene, and the scene within the scene of the banquet scene where he's talking to Fat Tony Salerno, played by Dominic Lombardozzi.
Yeah.
I think he's actually from Arthur Avenue.
Yeah.
That actor, and I just love what's going on, the dynamics of everything that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and all the looks that are passed back and forth between all these people. And then, the outer shell of everything, looking up at the stage, the guy from the NAACP and Frank Rizzo, the Mayor of Philadelphia. I remember that guy. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Food that they're eating, the dancers. So
Absolutely amazing. So what's next on the agenda, Kent? What's next on the horizon for you?
as I said, it's a New York movie. I don't want to say too much about it, but
Sure.
it's just it's another film in which an actress has to be in every scene. but this is for someone who's younger, for someone in their 30s.
Yeah. And are you sort of in the pre-pro phase or?
I'm waiting for an actress to read it.
Okay. Well, definitely.
Supposedly reading it as we speak. We'll see.
Well,
I don't know, but yeah.
I definitely look forward to that one. And
Thank you.
we really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you,
for asking
Ken.
me.